The telegram arrived in Berlin at precisely 3:47 in the morning, and Werner Kessler knew something was terribly wrong before he finished reading the first line. 3 U-boats lost in a single night. Not to storms. Not to mechanical failure. To British destroyers that appeared exactly where they should not have been, as if guided by invisible hands through the dark Atlantic waters. Werner sat alone in the signals analysis room of WWII headquarters, surrounded by decoded transmissions and cigarette smoke. He was 29 years old, trained in mathematics at Heidelberg, and possessed the kind of mind that noticed patterns others missed. For 6 weeks now, he had tracked a disturbing trend. German naval operations were failing at statistically impossible rates. Convoy routes that should have been secret were being intercepted. U-boat positions that changed daily were somehow known to the enemy. There was only one logical explanation, and it terrified him. The Enigma machine sat on the desk beside him, its rotors gleaming in the lamplight. German military leadership considered it the most sophisticated encryption device ever created. With 158 million possible settings, breaking Enigma was mathematically impossible. Every scientist agreed. Every analysis confirmed it. The code was perfect, but Werner had spent 3 years studying British naval responses, and the numbers told a different story. The British were not lucky. They were not guessing. They knew that he wrote his report carefully, documenting each anomaly with precise mathematical notation. He included probability calculations showing that chance alone could not explain the pattern of German losses. He concluded with a recommendation that seemed almost treasonous to write: the Enigma cipher may have been compromised. Immediate review of encryption protocols was essential. Colonel Ernst Vogel read the report the following morning while eating breakfast at his desk. He was a veteran of the First War, a man who trusted experience over theory and found young analysts generally too clever for their own good. He finished his coffee, signed the report as reviewed, and filed it in a cabinet marked for secondary analysis. It would never be read again. Werner requested a meeting 3 times over the following weeks. Each request was politely declined. The colonel was busy. The colonel was traveling. The colonel trusted the assessment of senior cryptographic experts who had already determined Enigma was unbreakable. Meanwhile, in a Victorian mansion in the English countryside, a team of mathematicians and linguists worked around the clock in conditions of absolute secrecy. Bletchley Park had broken Enigma 18 months earlier. Every day, they decoded thousands of German military communications. They knew where the U-boats were hunting. They knew which convoys were vulnerable. They knew the names of German commanders, their supply levels, their fuel reserves, their fears. The British called this intelligence source Ultra, and they guarded it more carefully than any secret in the war. Ships were allowed to sink rather than reveal that the codes were broken. Attacks were delayed until plausible alternative explanations could be constructed. The Germans must never suspect. Everything depended on their continued faith in their perfect machine. Werner discovered he was not alone in his suspicions. A signals officer in Hamburg had noticed similar patterns. A naval analyst in Kiel had written a comparable report. A cryptographic researcher in Vienna had requested a full review of Enigma security protocols. All 3 reports had been filed. All 3 had been ignored. The system was not designed to hear bad news. His wife Marta worked as a secretary in the Foreign Ministry, and she watched his frustration grow through the spring of 1942. She did not understand the technical details, but she understood her husband. Something was eating at him, keeping him awake, making him stare at nothing during dinner. She had her own secrets, though she did not recognize them as such. A colleague named Friedrich had begun asking strange questions about document routing. He lingered near filing cabinets he had no reason to access. He took lunch breaks that lasted too long. Marta noticed but said nothing. One did not make accusations without proof, and perhaps Friedrich was simply disorganized. She would later learn that Friedrich was transmitting Foreign Ministry communications to Moscow through a network the Soviets called the Red Orchestra. But that knowledge came too late. Like everything else, Werner made one final attempt in June. He compiled his evidence into a comprehensive brief and delivered it personally to a senior aide. The response came 3 days later in a single typed sentence: "The matter has been reviewed and requires no further action." That night, Werner walked home through streets celebrating news from the Eastern Front. German armies were advancing toward Stalingrad. Victory seemed inevitable. Officers raised glasses in crowded restaurants. Music played from open windows. Werner walked alone, carrying the weight of a truth no one wanted to hear. The machinery of defeat was already turning, hidden beneath the noise of triumph. He could see it clearly now, the pattern emerging from the static like a signal resolving into terrible clarity, but no one was listening. The inflatable tank looked absurd up close. Captain James Whitmore circled it slowly, examining the rubberized canvas stretched over a wooden frame. From 20 feet away, it resembled a Sherman tank. From 2,000 feet, through a German reconnaissance camera, it would be indistinguishable from the real thing. Whitmore had spent 18 months building an army that did not exist. Operation Fortitude was the most elaborate deception in military history, and he was one of its architects. Across southeastern England, fake encampments spread through the countryside. Dummy aircraft lined airfields. False radio traffic suggested massive troop movements toward Dover. Every detail was designed to convince German intelligence of a single overwhelming lie: the Allied invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. 300 miles away. Major Rudolf Brenner studied aerial photographs in his office near the French coast. He was thorough, experienced, and completely deceived. The evidence before him showed exactly what the Allies wanted him to see. Tank formations near Dover. Supply depots filling with equipment. The unmistakable signature of an army preparing to cross the Channel at its narrowest point. That he had no reason to doubt any of it. The double-cross system had been operating since 1940. Every German spy sent to Britain had been captured within hours of landing. Most were given a choice: work for British intelligence or face execution. They chose to work. Now these turned agents transmitted carefully crafted disinformation directly to Berlin, and German intelligence rewarded them as their most valuable sources. Agent Garbo was the crown jewel. A Spanish national named Juan Pujol Garcia, he had created an entirely fictional network of sub-agents spread across Britain. His reports to German handlers were masterpieces of detailed fabrication. German intelligence trusted him completely. They awarded him the Iron Cross for his service to the Reich, never suspecting that every word he transmitted was written by British officers. Brenner's reports flowed steadily to Berlin through the spring of 1944. Fusag, the first United States Army group, was massing near Dover under General George Patton's command. The force numbered nearly 150,000 men with armor and artillery sufficient for a major amphibious assault. Landing craft were gathering in southeastern ports. The attack would come at Calais. All evidence confirmed it. None of it was real. Patton commanded nothing but ghosts. His army existed only in radio signals, inflatable equipment, and agent reports. The real invasion force was gathering far to the west, preparing to strike beaches the Germans considered secondary targets. Lieutenant Hans Richter worked under Brenner, processing reconnaissance reports and agent communications. He was young enough to still ask uncomfortable questions. Certain details troubled him. Tanks that appeared in photographs but never seemed to move. Encampments that grew and shrank in patterns that made no tactical sense. Ships that materialized and vanished between reconnaissance flights. That he brought his concerns to Brenner on a gray morning in late May. The major listened patiently, then explained the realities of intelligence work. Contradictory data was normal. Equipment moved at night. Ships relocated between ports. The overall picture was clear, and that picture showed Calais. Hans left the meeting unconvinced but silent. Questioning superior officers carried risks he was not prepared to take. The invasion would come soon. Time would reveal who was right. Whitmore spent the final days before D-Day managing 1,000 small deceptions. Fake radio operators maintained their transmission schedules. Dummy landing craft received fresh camouflage. Agent Garbo prepared his most important message, a warning to German handlers that the Normandy landings were a diversion. The real attack would follow at Calais. The message would arrive too late to affect D-Day itself but in perfect time to keep German reserves frozen in place. Panzer divisions that could have crushed the Normandy beachhead would wait near Calais for an attack that would never come. June 5, 1944. Brenner completed his final assessment and submitted it through official channels. Calais remained the primary threat. Normandy forces were insufficient for a major invasion. Recommend maintaining current defensive positions. That he went to bed confident in his analysis. Across the channel, 156,000 Allied soldiers boarded ships in the darkness. Paratroopers checked equipment in crowded aircraft. Pilots memorized flight paths to beaches with code names: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. Hans Richter stood watch that night, monitoring radar stations along the coast. The first reports of aircraft came shortly after midnight. Hundreds of contacts, then thousands, filling the sky in patterns that made no sense if Calais was the target. He reached for the telephone to alert Brenner, then hesitated. Perhaps this was another diversion. Perhaps the real force would appear at dawn near Dover. He hesitated too long. By morning, the beaches were burning. Eva Schultz carried the photographs in a hollowed-out book, pressed flat between pages of poetry she would never read. She walked through the streets of Berlin with the calm expression of a woman running ordinary errands, though her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. Inside the book were images of Luftwaffe deployment orders, production schedules, aircraft specifications. Everything her Soviet handler had requested. She was 24 years old and absolutely certain she would not survive the war. The Red Orchestra had been operating across Nazi Germany since 1938. Communist sympathizers, anti-fascist officers, and idealistic young workers had woven a network that reached into the Air Ministry, the Economics Ministry, and the heart of German military planning. They transmitted secrets to Moscow through hidden radios, coded messages, and dead drops in city parks. The Gestapo hunted them obsessively but always seemed to be chasing shadows. Eva had joined the network through her brother, who had joined through a university professor, who had been recruited by Soviet intelligence before the war began. She worked as a typist in the Air Ministry, invisible among dozens of other young women processing paperwork. No one noticed when she lingered after hours. No one questioned when she requested access to filing rooms. She was furniture. She was nothing. She was the most dangerous person in the building. Colonel Mikhail Volkov received her intelligence in Moscow 3 days later. He added it to a growing picture of German military strength that Soviet commanders would use to plan their defense of Stalingrad. The Germans were stronger than they appeared but weaker than they believed. Their supply lines were stretched thin. Their reserves were committed. One decisive blow could shatter the illusion of invincibility. Volkov never knew Eva's name. He never knew the risks she took or the fear she swallowed each morning. She was a code designation, a source number, a stream of invaluable intelligence. That was enough. Otto Hartmann had a different path to treason. He was a Wehrmacht major, decorated for bravery in France, respected by his superiors, trusted with sensitive operations. He had believed in Germany once. That belief died in Poland in the winter of 1939. That he did not speak of what he saw there. The mass graves. The burning villages. The systematic murder of civilians whose only crime was existing. He returned to Berlin a different man, carrying memories that would not let him sleep. When a British intelligence contact approached him through a neutral diplomat, he did not hesitate. That he passed information about troop movements, defensive preparations, and command decisions. He knew that German soldiers would die because of his betrayal. He made the calculation anyway. This Germany, the one built on slaughter and conquest, needed to lose. Whatever came after could not be worse. Gestapo Inspector Victor Brandt sensed something massive lurking beneath the surface. 20 years of police work had given him instincts he trusted more than evidence. Too many small irregularities. Too many unexplained leaks. Someone powerful was feeding secrets to the enemy, perhaps multiple someones working together. He investigated methodically, following paper trails and monitoring suspected radicals. He made arrests. He conducted interrogations. But the network always seemed larger than his grasp, spreading through ministries and military commands like roots through soil. Every time he closed one cell, another appeared. the breakthrough came in August 1942 when German direction-finding equipment located a clandestine radio transmitter in Brussels. The operator was captured alive. Under interrogation, he revealed connections that led to Berlin, to Munich, to Hamburg. The Gestapo moved quickly, arresting dozens of suspected agents. Eva watched colleagues disappear from the ministry. Friends stopped appearing at their desks. Whispered warnings spread through the network: stay silent, destroy evidence, trust no one. She burned her contact codes and buried the hollowed book in her mother's garden. For 3 months, she did nothing but type reports and pray. Victor Brandt considered the operation a triumph. The Red Orchestra was broken. Soviet intelligence had lost its eyes inside the Reich. He wrote a report recommending commendations for his team and returned to routine counterintelligence work that he never discovered that the network's most valuable sources had escaped detection entirely. Eva resumed transmitting in the spring of 1943. Otto continued passing information until the day he died. The Gestapo had captured the branches but never found the roots. On July 20, 1944, a bomb exploded in Hitler's military headquarters. The conspiracy involved generals, colonels, and senior staff officers. Men at the highest levels of the Wehrmacht had plotted to kill the Führer and seize control of the government. Victor Brandt was summoned to assist the investigation. As he reviewed the evidence, he felt something cold spreading through his chest. The conspiracy was vast. Hundreds had known. Perhaps thousands. If men like this could hide in plain sight, who else might be waiting in the shadows? He had spent years hunting enemies of the Reich that he never suspected the enemies were everywhere. The sound of Soviet artillery had become as constant as breathing. Werner Kessler sat in the basement of WW2 headquarters, feeding documents into a small fire that cast dancing shadows on concrete walls. 3 years of intelligence reports. Analysis papers. Warning memoranda. All of it turning to ash while the Reich crumbled above him. Berlin was dying. April 1945 had brought the war home in ways that propaganda could no longer disguise. Russian tanks were grinding through the eastern suburbs. American and British forces had crossed the Rhine weeks ago. The thousand-year empire had months left, perhaps weeks, perhaps days. Werner had survived the war by becoming invisible. After his warnings about Enigma were ignored, he stopped warning. He processed information, wrote reports that said what superiors wanted to hear, and waited for the end he knew was coming. Now that end had arrived, and he felt nothing but exhaustion. The document in his hands was his original 1942 analysis of Enigma vulnerabilities. He had kept a copy, hidden in his apartment, a private record that he was right when everyone else was wrong. He held it over the flames, watching the paper curl and blacken. Then he stopped. He pulled it back, folded it carefully, and tucked it inside his coat. Someone should know. Someone should understand how this happened. The truth mattered, even when truth changed nothing. Major Rudolf Brenner had been captured 3 days after D-Day, still insisting that Normandy was a diversion. American interrogators explained Operation Fortitude in patient detail: the inflatable tanks, the turned agents, the phantom army that existed only in German imagination. Brenner refused to believe them. The deception was too complete. It could not be real. It took weeks before he accepted the truth. He had spent 2 years studying intelligence that was entirely fabricated. His analysis had been flawless. His sources had been lies. Everything he knew was wrong. The realization destroyed something inside him. He spent the remaining years of his life writing a memoir that no publisher would accept, documenting how completely and systematically Allied intelligence had deceived him. He died in 1967, still trying to understand how he had been so thoroughly fooled. Otto Hartmann was executed on August 8, 1944, hanged with piano wire on Hitler's personal orders. He went to his death without revealing his contacts or apologizing for his treason. In his final letter to his wife, he wrote only that history would judge who had truly betrayed Germany. Eva Schultz vanished into the Soviet occupation zone when the war ended. Some records suggest she was taken to Moscow for debriefing. Others indicate she died in the chaos of the final days. Her fate remains unknown. The intelligence she transmitted helped the Soviets anticipate German operations at Stalingrad and Kursk, contributing to defeats that broke the Wehrmacht's offensive power forever. Victor Brandt shot himself as Soviet soldiers entered his building. His final report, discovered decades later in a water-damaged archive, admitted that the July 20 conspiracy represented a fundamental failure of German counterintelligence. The enemies had been inside the walls all along. The Gestapo had spent years hunting shadows while traitors walked freely through the corridors of power. Captain James Whitmore returned to England after the war and rarely spoke of Operation Fortitude. The details remained classified for decades. He understood that the victory belonged to thousands of people whose names would never be known, the radio operators who transmitted false signals, the craftsmen who built dummy equipment, the turned agents who risked execution to feed disinformation to their former masters. He also understood the cost. German soldiers had died defending beaches that would never be attacked, waiting for an army that did not exist. Deception was a weapon, and weapons killed people. He made peace with that truth because the alternative was unthinkable. In the summer of 1945, American intelligence officers sorted through surviving German archives in a bombed-out Berlin office building. A young lieutenant named David Chen found Werner Kessler's 1942 report warning that Enigma might be compromised. He read it carefully, noting the precise analysis and accurate conclusions. 3 years before the war ended, a German analyst had seen the truth. His report had been filed and forgotten. His warnings had been ignored. The system had rejected information that contradicted its assumptions, and millions had paid the price. Chen added the report to a pile for historical analysis. Historians would eventually write books about German intelligence failures, documenting how arrogance, ideology, and institutional blindness had doomed the Reich to defeat. Werner Kessler lived until 1978. He cooperated with Allied debriefings, testified at war crimes trials, and eventually worked as a mathematics professor at a small university. He never forgave himself for surviving when so many others died. When asked how German intelligence had failed so completely, he always gave the same answer. We believed what we wanted to believe. We saw what confirmed our assumptions. The truth was always there. He would pause, staring at something no one else could see. We just couldn't look at it. The war ended. The ruins became monuments. The dead became numbers in history books, but the lesson remained, waiting for the next generation to ignore it.